names in a shorter amount of time.
He said that the first month that the Iranians got $700 million from the West as part of this JPOA, they sent $400 million right into Syria. Okay, that's a pretty profound notion. Now, the president, in his remarks, and this is the delusional part, I want you to help me understand. He was talking about Rouhani, and he said, when Rouhani ran for president of Iran, he promised that he was going to, make life better for people. Yeah, unemployment was high, and they were going to deal with the economy, and things would be fine. And so when we do this nuclear deal, and we give them this signing bonus, essentially, we'll sign the deal with the Iranians, and they'll suddenly get $150 billion that we've been keeping from them. Don't worry about it. They won't use it to, do bad things and spread their tentacles of evil. They're going to use it to concentrate on fixing the economy, because you see, Rouhani, he's the president of a country, and he wants to, deliver on his campaign promises.
Like Obama delivered on his. Oscar Wilde once said, "What's too stupid to be said is sung." And I wish Obama, when he'd give these answers, would just start singing.
Their pattern of argument on this is gone the following way. Yeah?
But this is the thing. It's like, the idea is, well, even. Since Hezbollah only gets $1 billion a year, why not give them $2 billion or $5 billion? If Hamas is only getting a trickle, why not increase it into a spigot or a cascade of armaments? And this is an astonishing argument. By the way, it's an astonishing argument in so many ways. Apparently, the president hasn't figured out that money is fungible, right? So if you're giving, if the money is in your left pocket or your right pocket, it does not matter. We have a guy at the University of Chicago, Harry Markowitz, who figured this out at a level of a Nobel Prize winning economist. So it's a staggering statement.
His argument, Bret, is it's cheap. He says what they do now is cheap. It doesn't matter. They're sending missiles to this one when they have no money.
Wait till they do it expensively. That's a stunning thing. If they're making this kind of mischief on a shoestring budget, imagine what they will be able to do if you just pump in, never mind, not $150 billion, pump in another $15 billion into these budgets. And this comes down to another bizarro aspect of the Obama administration's argument, which is somehow they can separate the nuclear portfolio from everything else that Iran is doing in the region. But the fact is, they can't separate the two, because Iran is one country and its nuclear ambitions are part of an overall regional or indeed global strategy. So this is this kind of weird attempt to sort of again ring fence the nuclear talks, even as, by the way, this is another point. They go on with the China comparison. When Mao wanted to send a signal that he was prepared to parley with the United States after 25 years of separation and division, he had the ping pong players go and meet the Americans and have a friendly match. When Khamenei is talking about a parley, what does he do? He imprisons a California-born American citizen and puts him up on trumped-up espionage charges. This is outrageous. It is outrageous that the American Secretary of State, I have a passport, as do all of you, that says the American Secretary of State requests the assistance of all citizens. And this Secretary of State is busy, when he's not breaking his leg, I hope he mends quickly, is busy parleying with one of his captors. And then he'll say, well, you have to understand, Javad Zarif represents the moderate wing of the regime, and Jason Rezaian is being held by the immoderate part of the regime. But if this leads to one of two conclusions, either, right, the moderate wing of the regime is not so moderate, or the moderates have no control or power over what the IRGC and the various other revolutionary groups in Iran do. So what happens? Are we going to strike a deal with a moderate regime that's fully sincere about wanting to curb the country's nuclear ambitions? And then the IRGC will go and do what it wants. It is the whole thing. I'm talking too quickly. The whole thing is mind-boggling. It's staggering. It is such a dereliction of the fiduciary and moral responsibilities of an American administration, never mind towards Israel, never mind towards our allies, towards the long-term security of the United States. It is outrageous what this president thinks he can get away with.
So we have about 10 minutes left. I want to talk a bit more about Iran. You know, you're getting to a point where, you know, I think you're raising the fundamental value proposition of this deal. And we're getting into the closing period of the negotiations. Whether they'll conclude by the end of June or they'll drag into the summer, we don't know. Congress did something very important, which was pass the Corker-Cardin bill, which will require the president to now show us this deal, which they weren't going to do. Now, at the very least, they're required to show Congress the deal, and we'll all get a chance to see what the answers to the questions of the details of this are. The details are yet to be determined. But this is the question. You know, at what point is this just not worth it? We're going to give them $150 billion. We're going to free them from the shackles of the isolation we've wrought. In return for what? And this is the question. Now, there are 4 or 5 areas, and I'm going to run through them. I want you to tell us why they're important, whether you think they need to be in there or not in this final deal. Inspections. You know, the president promises us that this deal will be so secure because we'll be able to get into places that we've never been before. We'll inspect very thoroughly, the most thorough inspection regime ever. And in order to have that, at least in any measure, you have to have anywhere, anytime inspections. We have to have the ability to go in and look around anywhere we want, including on military bases. Obviously, the Supreme Leader has said that's not going to happen. That's one. 2, the Iranians have been hiding their prior military work, and without the disclosure of it, we don't know. We don't know how quickly they can get to a bomb, and we don't know whether we won't be able to know if they're cheating in the future. There's a question of sanctions. When do they get sanctions relief? When do they get this $150 billion? When do we repeal the sanctions or ease them off? Do they get this before they come clean on the prior military work? Before they make irreversible steps? When do they get the sanctions relief? They say they want it up front. If they won't come clean on the military work under sanction, why would they come clean after they've gotten the money, I ask. And then how about this? How long should the deal last? You know, is it enough that in 10 to 15 years they can have a nuclear program of unlimited size that can build nuclear weapons in 5 to 10 years? Which of these things do you think we need to insist that our elected officials say, this is my red line. If the deal doesn't have X or doesn't have Y, I will oppose this deal. What other things are left to negotiate in your mind that make it just go from bad to dangerous and absolutely unacceptable?
Look, you know, one of the things that I find staggering, again, I feel like being a columnist in this day and age is like being in the land of marvels. We are just fresh out. The great experience, the American foreign policy experience of the first part of the century was the war in Iraq and the failure of intelligence. And yet now we have, after that colossal intelligence failure in Iraq, we have a president telling us we will have perfect intelligence. We will know for a certainty when Iran decides to break out with a bomb. Now maybe the president knows suddenly our intelligence gathering operation has gotten so fantastically great under John Brennan that we have perfect knowledge everywhere at all times. But as Daniel Patrick Moynihan, an infinitely wiser Democrat than than the president. I was about to say than his successor in the Senate, but that's another story. As Daniel Patrick Moynihan famously said, intelligence is never to be confused with intelligence. So the fact is, we won't have good intelligence. We have even worse intelligence with the adamant refusal to open military sites. And anyway, we have a spotless 70-year track record of always getting the WMD intelligence wrong. We thought the Soviets wouldn't detonate till the mid-1950s. They detonated a bomb in 1949. We thought the Soviets would never emplace nuclear missiles in Cuba, and in fact, we had a national intelligence estimate in September 1962 making this case. Of course, in October 1962, we realized it was complete baloney. We completely failed to know that India was about to detonate a nuclear bomb in 1998. And that was followed by the Pakistani test. And then, of course, the debacle in Iraq. But now the president comes back to tell us, oh, we've got this one down. So this is these are some improbable claims that the president is making. But look, that's almost the least of it. Let's imagine that this deal was being agreed to by some other president. It would have more credibility because that other president would probably not have so gratuitously and publicly abandoned previous red lines. And I think that's what really bothers the Saudis as well as the Israelis. It's not just the bad term, the inherently bad terms of the deal. It's the fact that this is a president who already showed that he's a bluffer. And so why should anyone take him seriously today? The Syrians don't take him seriously over chemical weapons. The Russians don't take him seriously over Ukraine. But on Iran, he's already saying, by the way, after years of saying the military option is never off the table, saying, well, frankly, it's off the table.
He said on the TV interview Channel 2, he said, the United States can't destroy Iran's military.
Well, you see, again, this is a perfect nonsense. I mean, this is a stupid comment. Yes, it can destroy it. Now, can the Iranians reconstitute it? Yes. Could you destroy it again? Yes. So if an Iranian nuclear weapon is indeed unacceptable, then that has to be an option that you mean to take seriously. I have a 5-year-old daughter. I often tell her behavior is unacceptable. She looks at me like, what do you think, I'm stupid? You know, obviously her behavior is perfectly acceptable because I'm never gonna bomb my daughter. And actually she would retaliate in ways that I could not sustain.
Talk about deterrence. Yeah.
So this is very problematic, and to me the great question is getting through the next 18 months, which I think are gonna be very difficult, and also starting to establish a pedagogy as to why we are entering this world. You know, I was commenting, I won't say who because the name is even bigger, if I dare say, than Lindsey Graham.
Lindsey Graham.
I mean,
I didn't realize I'd provoke the wrath of name dropping. Drop it, do it.
But no, I'm not going to do it. But look, here, I'll drop my own name. I wrote a column in which I made the point that we are now getting to the moment where there is no dialing it down, turning it back. Once we have a nuclear deal with Iran, should we have a nuclear deal with Iran, we are entering into a dark world where all of our options are going to become bad. One of the points that I make, a lot of Democrats, you hear the administration say, well, the only answer the Republicans have is war. That's not true, but it's becoming truer because they're limiting the options of whoever is the next president. What this deal is doing is telling the next president that if he or she really does want to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, then that president's only option is going to be war. So this deal is making war much more likely, and making not only war more likely, but making war more likely in a much more dangerous world, when Iran may already have 2 or 3 nuclear weapons, if not more. That's a scary thing. I mean, the president says, well, we're going to stop Iran from getting a bomb for the next 10 or 15 years. And I stop and think about that, and I think 10 or 15 years, that means when, for my youngest daughter, sometime between the age of 15, when she's a sophomore in high school, and 20, when she's a sophomore in college. That does not give me a great deal of comfort. I mean, that works perfectly for Barack Obama's political timeline, right? But that's not what interests me as a father of a child who is going to have a world in which a regime sworn to the annihilation of Israel, that says the annihilation of Israel is non-negotiable, okay, is going to have the means to make good on its threats. And that's absolutely terrifying. Of course, he's the first Jewish president, so allowances must be made. And he, having been the president, understands Israel's security situation so much more profoundly than some schmendrick like, I don't know, the Prime Minister of Israel. What would the Prime Minister of Israel know? Whereas the Prime Minister been all this time when Barack Obama has been thinking profoundly about the future of the entire Middle East and reconceiving the universe. Again, I get back to the chutzpah of the president trying to explain to Israel or the Israelis what's in their own best interest. At least concede to the Israelis that they may have some clue on this subject. They may have given it a passing thought, and maybe it's not the case that that a guy like Bibi Netanyahu wakes up in the morning and says, "Gee, I see that I have two options here. I can either go the way of the wise, magnanimous, just, far-seeing vision that President Obama has so wonderfully laid out for me, or I can take the low road of greed, deceit, conflict, and increasing international isolation that I prefer. I think I'll take the low road." You have to, at some point, again, it's an insult to the intelligence of people who disagree with them to assume that they're either fools or knaves. And that's not the case. And this is another infuriating aspect, that the president isn't even bothering beyond token protestations. Well, I understand where the Israelis are coming from saying, I kind of see it from the Israeli the Israeli point of view. Maybe they're not quite as insane and perfidious as I'm treating them.
He said something interesting along the lines. He was asked in the Channel 2 interview, he's giving a stem winder about peace, and she interrupts him and says, but, what if Israel had given back the Golan as you were trying to do? What if we, and then he says, well, we've never asked Israel to take risks to its security for peace. All right, we have a couple minutes left. Let's do one last subject quickly, because not everything should be doom and gloom in the world.
Right.